Here is the back or inside sidewall of the cooling inlet in place. Obviously you can see I got the holes drilled to mount the plate to the cylinder studs, and I've got the pound nuts temporarily in place just to hold it. Another thing that you will notice is the gap between the plates and the cylinder around in this area here is very tight. It's tight as far as there's very little gap, but it's not tight as I showed before that I was able to drop this down onto the cylinders. It's not so tight that you have to press this down to get it to fit. It just dropped in really nice. But now that it's held in place, there's very little gap between it and the cylinder. And there are the 3 pound nuts per cylinder, so there's 6 total holding this in place, as you can see. Another thing that I want to try to get, I don't know if it's going to be too dark, but underneath, this is the back side, obviously, comes around, drops down behind the cylinder. There's another stud, like I had showed in the previous video, under here. Let's see, is it going to be a little too dark? Maybe not too bad. You can see some of the cylinder nuts sticking out right here. If I were to just put a small little hole here and then try to hold this in place with this pound nut, the pound nut would only be holding half of the aluminum, because the aluminum again doesn't go around the entire pound nut. I didn't like that idea. And I can't make the aluminum any fatter because then it won't drop down alongside the cylinder here. It can't come down and then continue to go around, because you'd never get this piece to drop down into place. So I just choose to notch this out. And that's why, because it needs to clear this nut. Right now it's just laying on top of the stud. So I'll do that next. Now I could either trust my template and use my template mark, or since I can physically see with everything being held in place with the pound nuts, I could physically come in here with a marker and put a mark right where that stud is, and then cut this notch out. And I don't think it's going to get up underneath here at all. I guess it does. But you could see here potentially, I don't know if it's going to be blurry, it's resting on top of this one, and it's resting on top of this other one up in here somewhere. So those will get notched as well. So that will be the next thing that I do then, is to notch those clearance notches for those studs that are along the bottom of these cylinders. And then I'll come back and I'll put this back on and see how it all fits. Here is my setup for cutting those notches that I need to cut to clear those studs on the bottom side of the cylinders. Here is my mark where I need to make the notch. I've got a piece of wood underneath my C-clamp because I don't want the metal C-clamp to mar the aluminum. And I've got this assembly then attached to my drill press table, which is offset now. You can see that I've swinged it over so I can get my C-clamp on it and get the alignment that I need with the hole saw. So the hole saw tip then here will come down, and it will be right on the edge because I need to cut a half circle. So that the tip of the hole saw drill bit then will come down right on the very edge of the aluminum, and then it will cut that half circle notch that I need. This is a 7/8 inch hole saw. So I've got everything clamped down, secure, and I'll go ahead and I'll run this, and I'll just drop it down right on the edge of the aluminum, and it will cut that half circle. And I'll have to do this setup for each notch. I've got to cut 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I have to, after I make this cut, I have to move stuff around and reconfigure everything to do the other 3. But I'll get those cut, and then put them up on the engine and see how they align. Here's that back side plate back on the engine. I didn't put all the pal nuts back on it because I just wanted to get an idea if these cutouts were in the right location, and they are. They actually look pretty good. You can see there's one there. I know this is going to be really dark. And the one up front here, plenty of clearance. And I don't know if these will show up or not, but there are the couple up inside here. That one, and then there's the other one here. So those worked out well. So this piece for now is done. I'm going to move on to making, well, actually I already have it made, the baffle that goes between here that will tie this piece to this piece. All right. So now we have both side plates, if you will, fabricated. This is the outside piece. I've got the inside piece still over there attached to the engine. So next up is this internal baffle. This is the baffle that goes between the cylinders, and this piece ties the front side and the back side pieces of the inlet together. Basically, the way that I came up with this inlet or this internal baffle size was to use one of these as a guide, and by fitting, I actually used a piece of poster board that I would stick between the cylinders. So I had this piece mounted, I had the backside piece mounted, and then I just fit a piece of poster board down between the cylinders and decided basically how wide I wanted to make this. Now, if this piece, if you can imagine it going like this, and then the cylinders would be here, one on this side, and this going between them. If this piece was really tall, it would interfere with the airflow coming into the back cylinder. And when you look underneath the engine, it can't hang down very far because it starts to interfere with the intake tubes. So it can't hang down too far, and if it sticks up into the airstream, it's going to impede the airflow getting back here to this back cylinder. So again, with a little bit of trial and error, this is what I had come up with as far as width-wise. And then when you have this piece mounted on the engine and you have the back piece mounted on the engine, if you measure the distance between these two pieces, it's roughly 9 inches. So this template, these are the bend lines here for the end tabs. So the dimension between the bends is 9 inches. So the cooling inlets then will end up being roughly 9 inches across. So here's a piece that I had just made. I keep putting stuff in the way. So again, this dimension here is 9 inches with the tabs bent. And I decided to put holes in it, again, because this goes between the cylinders, but if there's some air flow down between the cylinders, if this is, again, mounted in this orientation, as air goes down between the cylinders, or if air comes through the fins in this orientation, it can get through here to the backside cylinder. And of course, it keeps it nice and light. This actually gets, it doesn't get wedged. It fits between the cylinders really nice. There's nowhere for it to go, so it doesn't need to be really stout. The main purpose of this piece is to tie the two side baffles together. So this gets ultimately riveted in this fashion here, with the other piece being here. So it serves a couple of purposes. Okay. The other good thing too about this is, with this being 20 thousandths thick, it does fit down between the cylinders nicely, and it is very flexible. As you can see, it's very flexible with all the holes in it. And it will, I'll try to get a picture of the other one that's currently in place, but you see as it goes down between the cylinders, it will end up contorting to fit down between there, because the cylinder fins, they're not parallel and they're not flat. You know, they're kind of rounded, and they're kind of, you know, few stick out more than the others as far as the fins. And this will kind of work its way down through all that and take a set. So it works out really nice. So again, with a little bit of trial and error, having these mounted on the engine and having this between the two side pieces and kind of moving it around and trying to figure out how to locate it, I laid out this one shows it a little bit. I laid out the, I don't even know if you can see it on the video, but I did lay out locations then for the holes and for the location of this piece. So that's the next thing to do then for me. I'm going to put these two side pieces back up on the engine just to verify that this piece does fit between them, and it does fit down between the cylinders. And I'll go ahead, this one's already been drilled, but I'll take the other one out off of the engine, the back side piece off of the engine, and locate the holes and get it fitted. So this will go, you can see how this lines up with the holes and with my marks here. This is going to go right like that. So let me get the other side piece fitted and drilled and get this thing put on, and then I'll show these three pieces mounted to the engine. Here is the arrangement so far. Again, this is the outside side place where the valve covers are. This is the inside side plate, or the side that is up against the engine block itself. And here's the internal baffle. And this is again simply held together with a couple of 440 screws. One thing I wanted to point out here, which I think is important, is to keep everything square and to keep everything on the same plane so everything is flat. You don't have this side low and this side high, or any of that kind of stuff. You want to make sure that your dimensions for this plate are the same on this plate. So for instance, this baffle piece here, the bottom of the baffle, because now this is flipped upside down, the bottom of the baffle is 1 3/16 inches up from the bottom edge here. So this dimension is 1 3/16 inches, and you want to maintain that on both sides. So this dimension here is 1 3/16 inches. And you can see that it sits nice on the table. It's square and flat. It's not twisted. You know, this side is not higher than the other side. The other thing that I want to make note of is the holes. If you look here, the screws are not centered across this dimension here. They're a little bit to the left. The center line would be over to the right more, and that is okay. This side here is a little bit closer, but it's still not exactly center. The reason for that is, one, it's mostly important on the valve cover side of the inlet. The leg here, you do not want that to protrude into where the valve cover opening is. It needs to be set back from the valve cover opening. Second of all, when you get this fitted in there on the engine itself, because of the way the cylinder fins are oriented between the two cylinders, this kind of has to weave its way between them, as I said. And it's best to have this a little bit offset instead of right down the center. So you can see here how this is set back from this edge and this edge. the baffle itself is a lot closer to the back, and that just makes it fit nicer between the cylinders. So I'm going to fit this up as it is onto the engine and see how it all comes together so far. Here is what we have so far. Got the inside or back side made, fabricated, installed. Got the outside piece made, fabricated, installed, and then the center baffle. And you can see, as I had mentioned earlier, that the center baffle, since it's nice and thin and flexible, it will kind of mold itself between the cylinders as needed. And you can see that here. A couple other things I wanted to make note of, if I can, without this losing focus. I guess it already is out of focus. These leg pieces that are bent for this center baffle, you want to make sure that they do not interfere with the opening for the valve cover. I'm trying to get this around here so I can show what I'm talking about. This leg here, you don't want the edge of this leg here to interfere with the opening of the valve cover. So if I come around here on the other side, these are the mounting screws for that center baffle, and that leg part that I just showed sticks out this way. You don't want it to stick out far enough that it would interfere with the fitting here. If that leg sticks out past the edge of the side piece, it's going to interfere with the valve cover. So you want to be aware of that on this front side. This back side, there's plenty of room for it. As you can see here, it's really not going to interfere with anything, regardless of where you put it, front to back, left to right. But you do want to position this piece here so that it will be somewhat in line between the cylinders. If it's too far back as the piece comes through, it's going to bend. If it's too far forward as the piece comes through, it's going to bend. So you want to be aware of that. But I believe the template hole locations are very close. And like I said, with the material being so thin, it's going to contour itself. Alright. So I'm going to take these back off, and I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of how to install the air inlet. Even though you can imagine a cover being on here, I want to demonstrate how this is going to go together before I put the top on. So let me get ready for that.